And now, from Nashville Public Television's Studio A, celebrating authors, literature, and ideas for more than 3 decades, this is A Word on Words with John Seigenthaler.
Hello, I'm John Seigenthaler. Welcome once again to A Word on Words. My guest today is Hubert Crouch. He's a graduate of Vanderbilt University and has been a practicing trial lawyer for nearly 40 years. A founding partner in Crouch and Ramsey in Dallas, Texas. He's here today with his debut novel, Cried for No One. It's inspired by an actual case he handled, a death case and a gruesome grave robbery of a college student. While the real case remains a mystery, Hubert has written a fictional account of the who, what, and why of this horrific crime. Hubert, welcome to A Word on Words.
I'm so glad to be here.
Thank
you, John.
Have you here.
It's great for me.
And great to talk about Cried for No One. You know, so much fiction, the author comes in, sits where you're now sitting, and I say, where'd this story come from? You invent this out of your mind, but much of this story you've lived.
Well, that's right. I mean, like I say, it was inspired, although it's not based upon this actual case. But I've been, as you pointed out, a trial lawyer in Dallas for years. Sure. And, you know, this case that I actually handled was just so bizarre, John, that I couldn't get it out of my mind because, as you pointed out, they never solved the actual grave robbery case. They never figured out who did it or why. And there was a lot of media attention generated by the case, and it was years and years ago. And so I thought I'd just make it up.
Well, you begin this with a grave robbery.
Yes.
You open the story
in the prologue
with a grave robbery in the prologue, and a body lifted by gloved hands. Shortly thereafter, you introduce us to Reverend Willie Talbot, who can't sleep. And Willie Talbot goes to church and finds what he thinks is the result of worshipers of Satan. Talk about how an author pulls a reader. I mean, you grabbed us with the prologue and given us Willie, the minister. I mean, you grabbed us and pulled us into this book. I mean, you want to go on at that point and find out what is there about this body I need to know more about, and how did this happen, and why did it happen, and talk about how you decided to open the story with the grave robbery.
Well, you know, I think it's sort of like a song to some degree, that you need a hook. You need something to grab the reader, and just like you pointed out, make them where they want to know more. And the whole idea behind this book is you want a page turner that, you know, the reader doesn't want to put down.
Well, you got me turning those pages, I'll tell you that.
Well, you know, and a lot of the readers that have commented on it and written reviews, that's their general observation, that they couldn't put the book down. They read it in 2 or 3 sittings. And I think that was the whole idea. As I say, the whole circumstance of a grave robbery, for crying out loud. You know, since Tom Sawyer, you really don't think about that happening.
That's right.
And in this particular, the real live case, there hadn't been a grave robbery for 50 years in this area. So when it came out, it's just bizarre, and I thought it would attract, you know, people's attention.
Well, it's the hook that gets you in, but there's a great mystery there. And then you introduce us to Alexis.
Yes.
Who's not going to be with us through through the entire book. And Alexis is having an affair with a politician. Dangerous thing for a woman to do if she wants to live long, you know, in this world. Where'd that come from?
Just pulled it out of thin air. You know, Alexis is just a you know, person of my imagination, and I thought, you know, people are interested in the political process and the hypocrisy of it all, and so I thought that would be kind of again an interesting way to start off the book, and that's sort of the first chapter after the prologue. You want to get to know her, and you juxtapose the two.
You put her together with a politician who is, as many politicians are, who find themselves caught in that trap of infidelity. He's a bit of a rogue. I didn't like him much.
No.
I wouldn't vote for Talmadge. Would not under any circumstances.
Neither would I, John. I wouldn't as well.
But talk about the two of them together and his need to get away from what happens.
Well, you know, one of the things...
You had to devise an escape route for him to remove him from her.
Right. You know, it's funny, we were just watching an episode of House of Cards last night, which I think is very interesting. And you see these double lives that are lived by these politicians. Absolutely. And they, you know, as you talked about the senator here, he's a very family values type guy on the outside. But on the inside, with Alexis, he's quite the contrary.
Oh, yeah.
He's, you know, preaching one thing and doing something else. And that, to me, is one of the most despicable things you can imagine. If you're going to, you know, talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk, so to speak. And I felt like I wanted to make that point. So many politicians don't actually follow through on what they tell us.
You know, it reflects the real life of American politics. Again, we see it. I mean, somebody's running for president of the United States, elected president of the United States, and he's having an affair with an intern. Another fella is running for president of the United States, has a wife who has cancer, and he's immersed in infidelity. And those are real-life stories on which you can draw. Doesn't seem like fiction much as you get into it.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the idea. It's sort of like reality is stranger than fiction.
That's right.
And I think we're all molded, John, by what we see, read about, what we experience. And like the old saying goes, you write about what you know. And I've been interested in politics, not running, but just, like I say, people not living their life according to what they're telling people.
Well, it was inevitable that we'd get into a lawsuit and that we would have opposing lawyers. Let's talk about these two fellows, because they're interesting. You know, as a journalist, I once covered the courts for about 3 years, and I've seen both of them. I've seen both of these guys and heard their arguments. But let's talk about the case and how you devised the idea of putting it together, because that's where the heart of the story is. Exactly.
And, you know, the case is basically the parents are suing because they said the cemetery should have taken steps to prevent somebody from coming on the grave robbery. They should have done something to actually prevent that. And they get this flamboyant lawyer from Fort Worth, that's where the setting for the case is, who, you know, people ask me, John, you know, who did you pattern this character after? And I didn't pattern him after anybody. It's an amalgam. It's different people I've run into. But I wanted him to have a Texas flair. And he does.
Oh, he does?
He does. You know, he dresses. He plays the part. He's an actor extraordinaire. He's good at what he does.
Very good.
And I've seen those people. And it could be a million different people all combined. And then you've got the other lawyer who's a little bit more laid back, more reserved, that's on the other side, not as flamboyant. And I wanted to have a contrast, you know, between the two, that the reader would be able to kind of maybe pick a side if they wanted to.
Right. And you give one of them a daughter.
Right.
And she's something else.
She's something else.
Let's talk about her.
Christine. Yeah, you know, I don't know how I really came up with that idea, but I like the idea of a father-daughter team. And, you know, she's smart as a whip. He had trouble getting through law school, but she didn't. She's brilliant.
Absolutely. She could have gone anywhere.
She could have gone anywhere. All the big firms wanted her.
They wanted her, and she came to him. She
came to him and didn't know how it was going to work at first, because he's a, you know, bigger-than-life personality, works beautifully. And you kind of see how he looks over her shoulder and teaches her kind of the ropes, and now they're a duo.
Yeah,
they're difficult to deal with.
He tells her at one point, the most vital part of trying a case is voir dire and opening statement.
Yes.
Now, where does that come from?
Well, you know,
I think that may be generally accepted by a lot of lawyers, but is that your...
No, John, I think you're right on, because it kind of follows the old adage, first impressions are lasting ones.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of empirical data that has been compiled that shows that most of the jurors, vast majority, make up their mind after voir dire and opening statement, before they've heard one piece of evidence. And so, you know, it's very...
Well, voir dire, we may have some non-lawyers out there who are saying, well, what in blazes is voir dire? And voir dire is when
jury
the
selection.
Lawyer gets up and asks the jurors questions about whether they have prejudices that might affect one way or another their ruling in the case, and you dump some jurors during voir dire. But anyway.
Well, you know, and going off on that, this is sort of an interesting. I tried a case years ago, and you know, a lot of times you have jury consultants that are paid by the lawyers that will help the lawyer read the body language of the jurors. And one of the jury consultants on the other side of a case I had was Dr. Phil McGraw, who, this was before, you know, he was...
Really?
Yes. He was helping the other lawyer pick the jury, and I actually asked, I said, who is this sitting in the courtroom? I said, it's my jury consultant. And of course, he successfully helped Oprah Winfrey pick the jury up in Amarillo.
Absolutely.
And I think the rest, of course, is history. But jury consultants, reading the jury panel, and then once you get your jury, tailoring your opening statement to try to appeal to them.
Let's talk for a minute about Leah, another character.
Yes.
Where does Leah come from?
Again, just kind of my imagination, and I've always been interested in kind of the journalism angle, and I thought this one, and she was an interesting character to me. Funny, she was added a little later.
Oh, was she?
Yeah. You know, it's always an evolutionary process, as you know, when you're writing a book, and particularly a work of fiction. And, you know, the magazine's Texas Matters. And it's kind of a play on words, and Leah is one of the reporters, and she's young, and she's ambitious, and she's honest,
and plays a major
role, and she's going to play even a more major role in the sequel.
Is she really?
Yes, she is.
Well, let's talk about this is your first book of fiction. Where did the idea come from that you could write fiction?
I think the idea came, I've always been interested in writing. I went to Andover, and one of my professors there, Kelly Wise, who was the inspiration for The Family Stone, the movie, was just really inspirational to me. And then went to Vanderbilt, was an English major. And you know, as a trial lawyer, you're writing briefs, you're making opening statements, and you're telling your client's version of a factual story, if you will. So I'd always been interested in it, and then when this case came along, I just thought there was so much interest and you know, generated that I'd give it a shot. And of course, you're never sure whether it's good. And I had a friend of mine who had, not a friend, just a guy I'd known at the time, who worked for Texas Monthly, who'd covered a big case I had. So I just decided I'd send it to him to find out if it was any good. And he read it and he said, I love this. So you know, you just go from there.
Now, obviously, to write this novel, and in a sense, it's a legal thriller. But to write it, you have to know, you have to do some research about things maybe you haven't investigated before. And there's a lawsuit here that involves a funeral home and a cemetery. How much research did you have to do to get inside the head of Mr. Arnold, the president of the funeral home?
Well, you know, again, he's just a character of my creation, and you know, you just try to imagine what he's going to be like, and all of a sudden, he just kind of came to me. You know, of course, and he's a gay man that
yes.
and that's kind of a complicating factor because he doesn't want to have it disclosed.
And why did you want to complicate it?
Because I wanted to kind of shine a little bit of the light. Even today, I think it's difficult sometimes for people that have gay tendencies to come out because they're worried about the repercussions that they'll have in their business life or some other life. And so, you know, he has the relationship in the story, and
And is somewhat nervous about disclosure.
as I think a lot of people are today. So I think there's more of an assumption. It's much better that people are not staying in the closet, but I think in some instances they still have to, or they feel like they have to.
Let me ask you, you've been there. You've been in the courtroom, on the firing line, in the pit. Now you're writing about being on the firing line, being in the pit. How does that translate?
You know, I think, like I was saying earlier, writing about something you know that you've experienced. You know, every time I would get ready for a trial, I wouldn't sleep very well. In fact, a lot of times I would be worried that I'd maybe have two hours sleep before a trial. Would I be good the next morning? Burning in my stomach, you know, all that stuff. So when I'm writing about what's going on in the courtroom, it's not something that I'm imagining. I've been there. I know those feelings. I know the pregame jitters. I know the
stomach growling again while you're writing about
it. Yeah, you can kind of feel it because you're creating a scene. You know what's happening at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. You know what happens the weekend before. So it's not somebody that hadn't lived it. I've lived it. I know what it's like. I've tried a lot of lawsuits. And so, you know, when I'm sitting down, and I write here in Tennessee, we have a place up in Mine Eagle. I get down below and looking out on the valley, the Pelham Valley, and I just imagine, I take myself back to those courtroom days and try to recreate in my own mind what I was feeling.
For those of you who are just tuning in, I'm talking with Hubert Crouch about his new book, Cried for No One. It's a legal thriller, as I say. You grab me the first page and pulled me into it and kept me there. Now, do you know how the case is going to come out before you started writing?
Had an idea. I had a rough outline. So, yeah, the answer is yes. And because I felt like I sort of needed to know where I was going before I started off on the journey.
Yeah. And but how about details? Did you know that there was going to be a request for $15 million in damages and
No.
$15 million more in punitive?
That was all something. What I try to do, John, is come up with kind of a very preliminary outline, chapter by chapter, that maybe has 4 or 5 sentences in it, and then I will let my imagination go wild after I just know where I am. So the figures that you mentioned, how the settlement negotiations went, what Cal Connors would do in the room, how Jace would respond, those are all things that come to me as I'm actually writing.
Well, you know, you really disappointed me. I start out and I meet this beautiful Alexis Stone. I mean, seductive, and lo and behold, I'm not in there 10 pages, and I realize she's gone. You kill her off. Rob, I was looking for a wonderful relationship, a lasting relationship, enduring relationship with the senator, and lo and behold, the next thing I know, she's being buried. You knew you were going there.
Yeah, I knew I was going there, and you know, I have to give a nod to my wife on that. You know. A lot of not on the killing her off, but on making her seductive, because a lot of times, John, what I'll do in the writing process, I'll write a chapter downstairs and email it to my wife upstairs because I want the female perspective. Because I don't know, you know, when a woman's getting dressed, when she's putting on makeup, when she's doing that, I can't write that as well as I would like to, and my wife can really put the female touches on it and make it more believable to my, you know, the female readership that I have. And so it's a nice collaborative effort that we have there.
Let's talk about the whole area of fiction writing, because you begin with an idea, and in your case, pretty substantive. You've got a pretty substantial idea of where you're going to go with this and what you're going to do with it. You know there's going to be a lawsuit. You know there has to be a lawsuit. That's what you know, and I think most often we write what we know. But there's, you know, there are nuances in there, things you don't know that require that you ask questions. One, ask your wife about putting on makeup, for example. But there are many other areas that you have to explore as you get into this. As I mentioned earlier, what do you know about being
well, I'll tell you a perfect example. You mentioned Leah Rosen.
Sure.
You know, I was sort of familiar with reporter's privilege, but that's not what I litigate all the time.
Right.
You're a First Amendment scholar.
Right.
I taught First Amendment at SMU, and I've gotten really interested in it, but I had to get in and really research this reporter's privilege issue because Leah Rosen is trying to get around that when she's having sources come to her.
And she's got to get around the law to get there.
Exactly. And I didn't want someone as knowledgeable as you to be reading the book and saying, he's got this all wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about on this reporter's privilege. I do. I'm in that business. So I had to get and research the cases and what the Supreme Court had said about it in order to get it right. And so that's one example, you know, of going out and doing your research where you want to get it right.
The story as it unfolds, largely in that courtroom, gradually you begin to feel the tension, and you give us a little taste of the tension on each side. On the one side, Cal's getting it. You got Jace Foreman. And, you know, you don't really know how this is going to come out. We don't. Did you know all along?
You know, I had a general idea about the ending, but again, a very vague outline, and allowing me a room to maneuver as I got to the end. So I guess the answer is yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
Well, I can understand that because again and again, authors say, characters in my story get away from me. Do you have that experience?
I wouldn't say they get away from me. I don't want to rein myself in, though, before I start writing where I can't develop them fully. So, you know, I try not to get so much into description that I lose the fast pace of the novel. This is a thriller. This is a legal thriller, and I want to maintain that. And so I try not to let them get out of control if I can.
So you try to keep a handle on them if you can.
Right.
And were you able to?
Well, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, the readers like yourself are the judge of that.
Well, no, I think the story, I mean, it is a wonderful story. I mean, for people, from my point of view, there are not enough legal thrillers in the market anymore, you know. I mean, it used to be that John Griscom would give you a book a year, and now it's a book every 5 years. Scott Turow gives you one every 10 years.
Right.
And we need more of this because there's an awful lot of drama. I once covered the courts, and I can tell you, I mean, there is a drama every day.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I like to read Grisham. I mean, I enjoy, he's a good storyteller. And there's a lot of real intrigue that goes in courthouse. Of course, one of the issues in this case is the judicial corruption issue.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we have elected judges in Texas. And, you know, the people that are asking them to decide their cases are making big contributions to their reelection campaign.
That's right.
And I think there's a real struggle with these judges. They don't like it either.
Well, I was not surprised that the possibility of corrupting the system crept into the plot of this story. Let me ask you one thing. Part of what the program is about is how writers write. You have a fine time when you were working on this. You sat down and just wouldn't come. The muse was not on your shoulder whispering in your ear that day. Do you ever suffer writer's block?
Occasionally.
How'd you get through it?
Well, I try to get something down. I try to get something down, and, you know, sometimes I'll look at it and I'll go back and read the next day what I've written, and my wife reads it that night, and I may chunk it and say, you know, that wasn't any good. On the other hand, I may say, well, that was good. I've got the general idea down. Let me refine it a little bit. And then there are other days where you just feel like I'm not on all cylinders. And usually those days I'll go work out or play my guitar. I'm a big music fanatic, and and then once I kind of ease up and quit pressuring myself, I go down the next morning and try. But I do, when I'm up on the mountain riding, I treat it like a job. I get up every morning and go down and try to write.
How does a lawyer with a busy practice as you have find time to write a novel?
That's an excellent question. When I started writing this novel, and it was, I don't know, 15 years in the writing, I was getting up at 6 in the morning and working for about 2.5 hours before I went to work. I'd write in the morning. And then I got sidetracked with lawsuits and the firm and all. And then when I came back, I said, I've got to just kind of take a sabbatical. And so I talked to my clients, and my lawyers underneath me had gotten older, and they're very excellent lawyers. And I thought, well, I'm going to take some time off, and I'm going to just devote to getting it finished.
I congratulate you on doing it. What's next now?
Got a sequel, and you'll be interested. First Amendment issues. I was intrigued when I was teaching free speech and First Amendment at SMU about this Snyder versus Phelps case, the Westboro Baptist Church case.
Yeah.
And so I decided to write a book that deals with a different sect called the Brimstone Bible Church. And they agree with a lot of things the Westboro people do, but more. They don't like the role of women in society. They think women are having too many rights,
right,
and that defies...
and that defies the Bible.
Right, exactly. So we've got religion, we've got women's rights, and we've got free speech in the First Amendment, and protests at soldiers' funerals, just like there. And where do you draw the line between the right of free speech and the right of an individual to bury their loved one in peace?
Pretty exciting.
It's really a fun one. I'm having a great time with it.
Well, we're running out of time. I have to ask you, when you finish, will you come back and we'll do it again?
This has been so much fun for me, John.
Well,
I would love to come back, and it's been
Well, I told
wonderful.
you this time would fly by, Hubert, and indeed it has. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And thanks all of you for watching. I'm John Seigenthaler for Word on Words. Keep reading.